Today, we're talking about Faro, which is a game that actually originates in 17th century France, but became iconically popular in 1800s Wild West America, and soon became the most popular saloon game to be found in pretty much every saloon west of the Mississippi. You pretty much were nobody if you didn't have a Faro table, and in fact, my grandfather and I used to play it during the Civil War. All right, I'm not that old and neither is he, but the game was insanely popular because it was a very simple thing to understand. Pretty much any illiterate idiot could understand it, and it had a very low house edge. As a matter of fact, the house edge was so small that most house dealers had to cheat in order to get any sort of house edge over the players themselves. So without further ado, let me go ahead and get down to explaining the game so you can understand how the game of Faro is played. The first thing I want to talk about is how Faro is a game that kind of looks a lot like roulette mixed with a little baccarat. But as you play the game, you're going to find the subtle differences between those two games and this particular game. The first thing I want to talk about with respect to the table is that this is not an official Faro table. This is just something I whipped up for the sake of demonstration. I just went ahead and put 13 cards in a horseshoe pattern, which is very similar to what you would find at a Faro table in the Wild West. You have one card representing all the 13 ranks in the deck. I just happen to use spades because I like spades, but typically on a Faro table, you would just have the rank with no particular suit depicted. So the game's rather simple. You have a deck of 52 cards, and what you have here is the deck is, you burn the top card of the deck and it's revealed to everyone. This card is completely out of play, but everyone sees that in fact it is a 9 of diamonds. Now, every player is going to place some bets around the table. So usually they played for pennies because this is the Wild West. So what you would do is you essentially pick a card which you think is going to pay out. And I'll explain payouts in one quick second. But say I like number 5, it's a lucky number. 8's a good number. I like 9, it's a prime number. And kings. Yeah, kings sound good. So what we have here then is we draw 2 cards. The first card goes to the immediate right of the deck, and that is called the dealer card. So here we have the king. This is essentially the losing card for all players. So any player that happened to have placed a wager on the king rank loses their money immediately. That was where the house edge comes into play. The immediate card dealt after that would be the carte anglaise, or the English card, or simply the player card. And so here we have a 5. So that just conveniently pays out here. This player right here doubles their money, and I return that money to them. Now, what we have here, though, is what about these bets that didn't pay out and didn't lose, the 8 and 9? Those bets surprisingly stay on the table. And this is one of the attractive features of Faro to any player, is that you only lose money if you wagered on the card that happens to be shown by the dealer. The interesting thing is there was also an option called player high card, which is you could place a bet essentially off this initial Faro table in a kind of just general vicinity right here. So if I put a bet here and I go ahead and flip the next card off the top of the deck, I get a 9, all right, and then I flip the next card, an 8. This would be a losing bet for that player because the player's card is 8 versus the dealer's card 9, which of course 8 is less valued than 9. But if those roles had been reversed, obviously, if the dealer had been dealt an 8 and the player had been dealt a 9, then that would have paid out as if they had actually put the money on the 9. So this game continues on for a series of rounds, every time one card being dealt to each side, dealer and then player. And as I said earlier, if the card on the dealer side reveals a spot that has been wagered by a player, they lose that sum. And if a card on the player side matches a wager of a player, that player would receive that. So you might be asking yourself, though, what about a scenario where the dealer card matches the player card? What happens in that kind of situation? Well, this is another time where the house has any sort of discernible edge, because in this particular case, any player who had wagered, for example, in this example, a 9 would lose half their money. So you would replace this 1 cent piece with a half penny, and the bank would take half their wager. So Players were free to change their wagers from one round to the next. They did not have to leave their money on a card once they'd placed it. In fact, you could play one round of Faro, not lose, and not win, and just simply pick your money up and walk away from the Faro table. Or you could have kept the money on that card or moved it to any other respective card at the table. Now you might be thinking to yourself, this game really rewards card counting, and you would be right. In fact, why blackjack is a game that severely punishes or discourages card counting, this game rather embraces it and makes it an integral part of the game itself. There is a separate position at the table where a person known as a coffin keeper would operate a box or some sort of abacus device called the case, where they would have 13 spindles, and each spindle would have 4 beads on it. And as any particular card was dealt irrelevant of its suit, one of those beads would be moved from the left-hand side to the right. So any player would be able to clearly see how many of a particular ranked of card was left in the shoe. Now this would continue on and on and on until there were only 3 cards left in the deck. And every other card had been dealt except for these 3 cards. When you were down to 3 cards, you could clearly see from the case what those 3 cards were, and players were expected to place a final bet where they had to guess what the order was of those 3 cards. In the extremely rare case where there were a pair of cards in this final 3, for example, 3-3-5, you would then be expected to make a different wager where the odds were slightly less for payout, and this was called cat hopping. So you had essentially were given less payout odds because your odds of picking the right order were less, because you simply could say like 3-3-5 or 3-5-3 or 5-3-3. There were only 3 options really in that particular situation. So that's why the payout was only 1-3 instead of 1-4. As you would see, had the case been where this was like 5-6-7, and you had to pick which card came out in which order. It's kind of like picking a trifecta in horse racing. Very difficult overall. Even if you know what the top 3 finishers are going to be, you have to pick which order you think they're going to come in when the game ends. So this is actually a really interesting game in this respect. Now, the game became very popular, as I said earlier, because of its simplicity of play and the low house edge. But the game kind of fell out of popularity due to the fact that so many different gambling establishments started to cheat. And there were a variety of cheating methods that different houses used. The most common method of cheating was a simple gaffed box, where they would essentially have mirrors inside the box where I could see, the dealer, could see which card was going to be dealt next. And then there were even devices that would allow you to flip multiple cards. And then if the case keeper wasn't, in fact, keeping an accurate record of what particular order the cards were coming out, we could blame him for not being very good at this. Another way of doing it, of course, was to stack the deck. This was a rigged deck where you constantly are placing cards in order with each other, so you would be dealing constantly pairs of cards where you'd be getting 9s and 9s, 8s and 8s, 5s and 5s, in order to get half the wagers from all the respective players. And also in line with this idea of the house cheating, a lot of times they would use textured cards so that a dealer, while shuffling the deck, would be able to essentially feel what certain cards were, and they could put them in a certain position while still keeping the illusion that it was a fair shuffle. Inherently, the game had some severe drawbacks in regards to its how fair it was as a game. And it's why it kind of fell out of popularity as additionally more fair games came into play, like 5-card draw poker and even Texas Hold'em, which were considered widely more popular games, but inherently required a little bit more knowledge to understand, because you had to understand the suit and hand structure of the hierarchy. This was a simple high card, low card kind of thing, and a lot of people could understand it relatively easily. As long as you understand that ace is worth 1, and it was just a matter of matching cards, really. Of course, then the players themselves fought back and decided to start cheating their own ways. So the ways that players would commonly cheat they would use sleight of hand and distraction in order to move wagers from a losing position to a winning position, or just simply move from a losing position away from it so that you don't lose your money. This, of course, you had to do very quickly, and you typically involved some sort of distraction in order to get everyone to look away from the table. Another common maneuver is players would attach horsehair or some other very thin, almost invisible object or fishing line of some kind on their wager, so that they could scoot their bets by simply manipulating their hand and almost like ghostly move their wager from one position to the next. This, of course, was harder to detect, but if you were observing the table the entire time, it certainly was pretty obvious that somebody was up to shenanigans. And if the rare case that a player was caught cheating, there was typically a gunfight of some kind, and a lot of people lost their lives. A couple of fun facts for you, though, when it comes to Faro. The 18th century adventurer and author Casanova was known to be a great player of Faro and mentioned it frequently in his autobiography. In addition to that, we have our 19th century famous gunfighter, John Doc Holliday, who was actually a Faro dealer, and when he lived in Tombstone, Arizona, and he actually dealt Faro at the Birdcage Theater as an additional source of income, passed his life as a famed gunfighter and dentist with tuberculosis. That's a horrible combination. So that's the game of Faro. Very simple to play, low house odds, lots of really quick play that can go on. Typically, like I said, you'll need a Faro table, or you can make a makeshift one like I did, or even draw one out on a piece of paper. Whatever you want to do, give it a try. If you have any comments or questions, go ahead and leave them as a comment down below. And guys, if you could, clickety-clack that like button, pump that subscribe button, ring-a-ding-ding that notification bell, and make sweet, sweet love to that share button, because sharing is caring. My name is Dominic. This is the All-American Casino Guide reminding you, play responsibly.